As the night slowly settles in and everything becomes calm and quiet, it's the perfect moment to listen to a fairy tale. A story that has been softly told from one generation to the next. Tonight, we will journey together into a timeless forest where the rustling leaves hold ancient secrets, and a certain little girl, known for her bright red cloak, embarks on an unforgettable adventure. Imagine the gentle whisper of the wind through tall trees, the soft scent of pine, and the quiet comfort of a familiar winding path. This is where our magic truly begins. But before the story truly begins, you should get comfortable. Take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. So make yourself comfortable, let the outside world fade away, and let tonight's story begin. Settle in, relax, and allow the quiet magic of the tale to carry you through the night. And so, our story begins with you, a child of gentle spirit and bright, curious eyes, living in a small, picturesque cottage nestled on the edge of a whispering forest. You were a cherished little girl, known throughout the village, not just for your sweet disposition and a heart full of kindness, but especially for a very particular garment. It was a beautiful, velvety red cloak, a gift from your adoring grandmother, sewn with such love and care that it seemed to glow with warmth whenever you wore it. The hood, in particular, was a magnificent splash of scarlet, framing your face with a cheerful brightness that earned you the endearing nickname that everyone, even your own mother, lovingly used, Little Red Riding Hood. This cloak was more than just a piece of clothing. It was a symbol of your grandmother's affection, a comforting embrace that you carried with you, a constant reminder of her gentle smile and the stories she loved to share. You wore it almost every day, feeling its soft fabric brush against your skin, a comforting presence as familiar as your own heartbeat. One crisp, clear morning, as sunlight streamed through the kitchen window, dappling the wooden table with dancing gold, your mother called you to her side. Her voice was soft, laced with a tender concern that always signaled something important. The air was filled with the comforting aromas of freshly baked bread and simmering fruit, a scent that always made your cozy home feel even more inviting. She gently placed a wicker basket into your small hands, its contents carefully arranged and covered with a clean white cloth. Inside, you could just glimpse the golden brown crust of a freshly baked cake, still warm, and a small corked bottle of rich ruby red elderberry wine, meant to restore strength and bring comfort. "My dear Little Red Riding Hood," your mother began, her voice a soft murmur. "Your grandmother isn't feeling quite herself today. She's a little poorly and could do with some cheering up. I've baked her favorite cake and bottled some of the elderberry wine just for her. Would you be a good girl and take these to her cottage?" You looked up at your mother, your heart swelling with a mix of eagerness and a quiet sense of responsibility. Your grandmother lived a little way off, across a small stretch of the enchanting woods, in a cottage that was just as quaint and welcoming as your own. You loved visiting her, listening to her tales, and feeling the warmth of her embrace. The thought of bringing her comfort filled you with a purpose that made your little chest puff out just a bit. You nodded enthusiastically, the red hood of your cloak bobbing slightly. "Oh, yes, Mama, I'd love to," you replied, your voice bright with readiness. Your mother smiled, a tender, knowing look in her eyes. She then knelt down, bringing herself to your eye level, her hands gently resting on your shoulders. "Now listen closely, my precious one," she advised, her tone becoming a little more serious, but still brimming with love. "The path through the woods is well trodden, and you know it well. But you must be very careful. Do not stray from the path, not even for a moment. Keep to the main track and walk directly to Grandma's house. Don't stop to play, don't talk to strangers, and whatever you do, go straight there and straight back. Your grandmother needs these treats, and you must deliver them safely and without delay. Promise me you'll be sensible and remember everything I've said." You promised, a serious little nod reinforcing your commitment. The weight of the basket in your hands felt important, a tangible link between your mother's care and your grandmother's need. You loved the feeling of being entrusted with such a special task, a grown-up responsibility that made your heart sing with quiet joy. Your mother gave you one last loving squeeze, adjusted your bright red cloak, ensuring the hood sat perfectly, a vibrant beacon against the dappled light. She reminded you to give Grandma her warmest wishes and a big hug. With a final encouraging smile, she watched as you stepped out of the cozy familiarity of your home, the door closing softly behind you. The morning air was fresh and cool on your cheeks, carrying the faint scent of damp earth and distant wildflowers. You clutched the basket handle, feeling the comforting warmth of the cake through the cloth, and took your first steps onto the winding path that led into the magical, sometimes mysterious woods. Each step was light, filled with the simple happiness of childhood and the important mission you were on. You kept your mother's words close, a gentle echo in your thoughts, guiding your eager feet forward, deeper into the quiet embrace of the ancient trees, towards your beloved grandmother's cottage. The sun shone down, painting golden patterns on the forest floor, and the birds sang their morning songs, a cheerful chorus accompanying you on your journey. The path that snaked through the forest was more than just a trail. It was a familiar friend, a ribbon of worn earth that had witnessed countless journeys, yours among them. As you ventured deeper, the gentle transition from the open fields to the whispering woods was a sensory experience, a subtle shift in the world around you. The sunlight, once bright and direct, now filtered through the dense canopy of ancient trees, creating a dappled pattern on the forest floor, like a grand, ever-shifting mosaic of light and shadow. Each step you took felt soft against the mossy ground, cushioned by fallen leaves and the delicate undergrowth that carpeted the forest. The air itself seemed to change, becoming cooler, imbued with the rich, earthy scent of damp soil, pine needles, and the faint, sweet perfume of wildflowers that bloomed shyly in the shade. You clutched the wicker basket a little tighter, its comforting weight swinging gently with your rhythmic steps. The warm cake inside, nestled beside the elderberry wine, felt like a small, precious cargo, a tangible expression of love and care. Your bright red cloak, a vivid splash of color against the muted greens and browns of the forest, seemed to hum with its own quiet energy, a beacon in the gentle twilight beneath the trees. You hummed a little tune as you walked, a simple melody that echoed the cheerful chirping of unseen birds in the branches above. The forest was alive with sound, a symphony of nature's whispers. The rustle of leaves, stirred by an unseen breeze, the distant tap-tap-tap of a woodpecker, the soft buzz of insects flitting amongst the blossoms. It was a world brimming with quiet wonders, and though you were on a mission, a part of you couldn't help but absorb its tranquil beauty. The path itself was winding, curving gently around ancient oaks with gnarled roots that spread like intricate sculptures across the ground, and slender birches with their silvery bark peeling in delicate scrolls. You knew every twist and turn, every sturdy stone that marked a slight incline, every patch of soft moss that invited a lighter step. This was your path, a route taken many times before, and it felt safe, almost like a continuation of your own cozy home. Your mother's words echoed softly in your mind. Do not stray from the path, not even for a moment. And you took them to heart. You imagined her gentle face, her kind eyes, and the responsibility of your task felt important and real. You would be sensible. You would go straight to Grandma's. As you walked, you observed the small, exquisite details of the forest. Delicate ferns unfurled their fronds along the edges of the path, catching tiny droplets of dew that sparkled like diamonds. Bright red toadstools, like miniature umbrellas, pushed through the leaf litter, adding their own pop of color to the verdant scene. You saw a busy squirrel scamper up the trunk of a giant oak, its bushy tail twitching with industrious purpose, and a small, timid rabbit dart across the path ahead, its white tail a fleeting flash against the brown earth. These were familiar sights. Comforting presences that made the forest feel less like an untamed wilderness and more like a vast, friendly garden, full of tiny inhabitants going about their daily lives. You smiled, a quiet joy bubbling within you at the simple beauty surrounding you. The air grew a little cooler as you moved deeper under the canopy, a gentle breeze rustling the leaves overhead, creating a soothing, almost hypnotic sound. It was the kind of sound that could lull one into a peaceful dream, a soft, constant murmur that felt like the forest itself was breathing around you. You took a deep, contented breath, filling your lungs with the clean, fresh scent of pine and damp earth, a smell so distinct to these woods. The journey wasn't long, but it was just enough to feel like a proper adventure, a little expedition into a world slightly different from your own backyard. You imagined your grandmother, perhaps, sitting by her window, looking out into these very woods, maybe even thinking of you. You pictured her gentle smile, the way her eyes crinkled at the corners when she laughed, and the thought spurred your steps, making you eager to reach her and deliver the comforting treats. You continued on, your bright red cloak a cheerful splash of color, a small, vibrant presence in the vast, quiet forest. The path, though well known, still held little surprises. A cluster of tiny bluebells peeking out from beneath a fallen log, a particularly glossy green leaf clinging to a dewdrop, reflecting the filtered light like a tiny mirror. You appreciated these small wonders, your child's eye open to the magic in the mundane, even as your feet kept steadily moving forward, guided by the familiar contours of the trail. The soft rhythm of your footsteps, the gentle sway of the basket, the rustle of your cloak, all contributed to a peaceful, almost meditative journey. There was no hurry, only a steady progression, a quiet purpose driving you deeper into the heart of the woods, towards the cozy cottage where your beloved grandmother awaited your arrival, and the warmth of your thoughtful delivery. The forest enveloped you in its serene embrace, a silent, watchful companion on your gentle journey. As you continued along the familiar path, your steps light and steady, the forest felt comforting and familiar, a beloved companion on your journey. The dappled sunlight filtered through the leaves above, painting shifting patterns on the ground, and the gentle breeze whispered secrets through the ancient branches. You were so absorbed in the quiet beauty around you, the rhythmic sway of your basket, and the pleasant anticipation of seeing your grandmother, that you didn't immediately notice the subtle shift in the air, a slight disturbance in the peaceful harmony of the woods. Then, quite unexpectedly, from behind a particularly thick cluster of hazelnut bushes that grew at the very edge of the path, a figure emerged. It was a creature you rarely encountered so directly, a being of the wild, yet one that seemed to carry an unusual air of, well, civility. A large wolf stood before you, not in a way that seemed immediately threatening, but rather as if he had merely happened upon you, a chance encounter on a quiet morning. His fur was a beautiful, grizzled gray, blending almost perfectly with the shadows of the forest, and his eyes, though piercing and intelligent, held a peculiar glint, a spark that was hard to decipher. They weren't overtly malicious, not yet, but rather unnervingly keen, observing your every movement with an almost unnerving intensity. He wasn't snarling or showing his teeth in a frightening way. Instead, he inclined his head ever so slightly, a gesture that, coming from a wild animal, felt oddly sophisticated. His voice when he spoke was surprisingly deep and smooth, almost like a low rumble that resonated through the quiet forest air. It was a voice that, despite your mother's warnings about strangers, carried a deceptive charm, an almost hypnotic quality that suggested friendliness and good manners. "Good day to you, Little Red Riding Hood," he purred, his words sliding out effortlessly, as if he had been practicing them. The sound of your special nickname, spoken by this unexpected stranger, made you pause, a small flutter of surprise in your chest. How did he know your name? You hadn't seen him before. Not like this, so close and so articulate. You stopped, clutching the handle of your basket a little tighter, a tiny spark of caution igniting within you, yet tempered by the wolf's surprisingly gentle demeanor. He wasn't growling, he was speaking, and with such pleasant tones. Your mother had warned you not to talk to strangers, but this creature seemed so polite, almost like a character from one of your grandmother's storybooks. You returned his greeting with a shy, polite nod. "Good day to you, too," you managed, your voice a soft murmur in contrast to his resonant tones. The wolf took a step closer, not menacingly, but with a calculated slowness that belied his true intentions. He surveyed you from your bright red hood to your little shoes, his gaze lingering for a moment on the wicker basket you held. "And where might you be off to so early this fine morning, with such an important-looking basket in hand?" he asked, his voice still smooth and inquisitive, laced with a feigned curiosity. He even managed a smile, a wide, unsettling stretch of his muzzle that revealed a glimpse of sharp teeth, though he quickly softened it, making it seem amiable. It was the kind of smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, a subtle dissonance that might have been imperceptible to anyone but the most discerning observer. You, being an innocent and trusting child, and perhaps a little flattered by his interest, felt your initial apprehension begin to wane. He seemed friendly enough, just a talkative wolf, curious about your journey. "I'm going to visit my grandmother," you explained, your voice gaining a little more confidence. "She's not feeling very well, so my mother has sent her some cake and a bottle of elderberry wine to help her feel better." You held up the basket just a fraction, unconsciously displaying its comforting contents. The wolf's eyes seemed to gleam a little brighter at your words, a flicker of something sharp passing through them, quickly masked by his genial expression. "Ah, your dear grandmother," he mused, as if he knew her well. "How thoughtful of you. Such a kind gesture for a sweet girl like yourself. And she lives far from here, does she not, deeper into the woods?" He tilted his head again, a picture of innocent inquiry, his ears perked slightly. You nodded again, feeling a surge of pride in your mission. "Yes, she lives just a little further along this very path," you confirmed, gesturing vaguely ahead with your free hand. "Her cottage is just past the big oak with the twisted branches." The wolf's smile broadened, this time a little more genuine, but chillingly so. He seemed to be absorbing every detail you offered, processing it with a speed and cunning that you, in your childlike simplicity, couldn't possibly comprehend. "What a wonderful granddaughter you are," he flattered, his voice dripping with false warmth. "But tell me, Little Red Riding Hood, have you ever noticed how truly beautiful the flowers are in this part of the forest? The path, while practical, sometimes keeps us from appreciating the true wonders all around us." He swept a paw in a grand, encompassing gesture towards the dense undergrowth just off the path, where vibrant clusters of wild roses and delicate bluebells bloomed in profusion, their colors striking against the green. Look at those exquisite blossoms. Don't you think your grandmother would adore a lovely bouquet to brighten her sick room? They would surely make her feel much better, perhaps even more so than cake and wine alone. He spoke with such conviction, his eyes alight with what seemed like genuine admiration for the flowers, that his words began to weave a subtle spell. The idea of bringing your grandmother a beautiful bouquet, a fragrant gift from the forest itself, in addition to the food and wine, suddenly seemed like a wonderfully thoughtful notion. It would be a double surprise, a double delight. You looked from the wolf's seemingly earnest face to the vibrant splashes of color amongst the trees, a small seed of temptation beginning to sprout in your mind, nudging at your mother's warning. The wolf's suggestion hung in the air, a silken temptation weaving its way into your innocent thoughts. You looked from the vibrant clusters of wildflowers, their petals trembling slightly in the gentle breeze, back to the wolf, who watched you with an almost paternal air of encouragement. His eyes, though still unnervingly intelligent, seemed to soften, reflecting the colors of the blossoms he so enthusiastically pointed out. "Think how delighted your grandmother would be," he reiterated, his voice a low, persuasive hum, "to receive not only these wonderful treats, but also a beautiful bouquet, picked especially for her by her loving granddaughter, a true feast for her eyes and a comfort for her spirit. After all, what better way to cheer a poorly soul than with the boundless beauty of nature?" The idea blossomed in your mind quickly, overshadowing your mother's earlier warning. The simple joy of gathering flowers, a gentle pastime you often enjoyed in the fields near your home, now seemed imbued with a greater purpose. It wasn't just about picking flowers. It was about adding an extra layer of love, an unexpected gesture that would surely make your grandmother smile even wider. The thought of her delight was a powerful motivator, pushing aside any lingering doubts about straying from the straight path. Besides, you reasoned you wouldn't be going far off the path, just a little way into the soft undergrowth, just enough to gather a handful of the most beautiful blossoms. With a final bright smile, the wolf gave a knowing nod, as if confirming your excellent decision. "Go on then, Little Red Riding Hood," he encouraged, his voice resonating with what sounded like genuine benevolence. "Don't rush. Take your time. Choose the very best ones. The forest offers so much beauty to those who take a moment to truly see it. I'll just be on my way now, but I trust you'll have a splendid bouquet for your dear grandmother." And with a final, almost imperceptible flick of his tail, he melted back into the shadows of the deeper woods, disappearing as silently as he had arrived, leaving you alone amidst the quiet rustle of leaves and the gentle allure of the blossoms. You watched him go, a tiny thrill of adventure mixing with the sense of a thoughtful mission. He had been so polite, so encouraging. Perhaps your mother's warning about strangers didn't apply to all strangers, especially not to a friendly, flower-loving wolf. Setting your basket carefully down at the very edge of the path, where a patch of sun warmed the soft earth, you took a tentative step off the familiar trail. The ground beneath your feet felt different here, softer, covered in a richer layer of moss and fallen leaves. The air was thick with the sweet, heady scent of honeysuckle and wild roses, an intoxicating perfume that beckoned you deeper. Your eyes sparkled with discovery as you spotted a cluster of vivid bluebells, their delicate heads nodding gracefully in a hidden dell. Further on, wild irises unfurled their purple sails, and tiny white starflowers dotted the green carpet like scattered pearls. The forest floor was a vibrant tapestry of color and life, a silent invitation to explore its hidden gems. You bent down, carefully plucking a bluebell here, a buttercup there, holding them gently in your small hand. Each flower seemed more beautiful than the last, their petals velvety soft against your fingertips. You found a patch of fragrant wild roses, their blushing pink petals almost irresistible. And though their stems were thorny, you carefully navigated them, mindful not to prick yourself, determined to add their sweet perfume to your growing bouquet. Time, which had felt so structured and purposeful on the path, now seemed to stretch and ripple, dissolving into the timeless beauty of the forest. The gentle rustle of leaves, the distant call of a cuckoo, the soft hum of bees diligently gathering nectar. These sounds enveloped you, creating a peaceful bubble where the world outside seemed to fade away. You moved from one cluster of flowers to another, a delightful scavenger hunt. Oh, these lovely white ones. For Grandma, you murmured to yourself, and these bright yellow ones to cheer her up, and a big, fragrant pink rose for her bedside table. You envisioned her smiling face, her eyes lighting up at the sight of your colorful offering, and it spurred you on. You ventured a little further than you had intended, drawn by the promise of ever more beautiful blooms just beyond the next tree, just around the next thicket. The path was no longer visible, obscured by the dense foliage, but you told yourself you hadn't strayed too far, just enough to gather the perfect selection. Your small bouquet grew steadily larger, a vibrant mix of blues, yellows, pinks, and whites. Their combined fragrances, a sweet cloud around you. You carefully arranged them, ensuring each flower had its moment to shine, imagining your grandmother placing them in a small vase by her window. You lost track of the sun's position, of the passing minutes, of how far you had wandered from the main path. The quiet magic of the forest held you captive, enchanting you with its delicate beauty. Every new flower discovered was a small triumph, every sweet scent a moment of pure joy. You felt connected to the forest, a part of its gentle rhythm, completely unaware of the true purpose behind the wolf's cunning suggestion. While you were happily engrossed in your innocent flower picking, carefully crafting a loving gift for your grandmother, the clever wolf was not idle. He had taken advantage of your distraction, using the precious moments you spent off the path to embark on his own, much more sinister journey. He had no interest in the beauty of the blossoms. His mind was set on a singular, dreadful destination. He knew exactly where he was going, and he was moving with speed and purpose, taking the most direct route along the path you had so diligently followed, rushing towards your grandmother's cottage, completely unhindered by flowers or filial duty. It was only when your arms were full and the setting sun began to cast longer, cooler shadows through the trees that a tiny prickle of urgency finally stirred within you. The light was fading, and a sense of unease, faint but persistent, began to replace the pure joy of flower gathering. Your mother's words about not delaying and going straight to Grandma's finally echoed more clearly in your mind. You looked around, a little disoriented, the familiar landmarks of the path now hidden from view. Taking a deep breath, you carefully gathered your bouquet and your forgotten basket, which still sat patiently at the edge of the now refound path, and quickly resumed your journey, a newfound briskness in your steps, a sense of anxious haste replacing your earlier peaceful wanderings. While you, dear little Red Riding Hood, were happily lost in the vibrant tapestry of wildflowers, carefully selecting each blossom for your beloved grandmother, the cunning wolf was far from idle. He had no time for the delicate beauty of the forest or the sweet scents of its blooms. His mind was set on a singular, much darker purpose, and he moved with a swiftness and efficiency that belied his earlier charming demeanor. The moment you had stepped off the path, lured by his deceptive suggestion, he had turned and, without a moment's hesitation, taken the most direct route along the well-trodden trail, running with silent powerful strides towards your grandmother's cottage. His paws, usually so careful in their predatory hunt, barely disturbed a leaf as he sped through the undergrowth bordering the path, keeping himself hidden, yet moving with startling speed. The forest, which had offered you such serene beauty, now served as his swift, silent highway. He knew exactly where he was going, having extracted the information from you with practiced ease. The big oak with the twisted branches was a clear landmark, and he passed it in a blur of gray fir, his keen eyes already scanning ahead for the familiar sight of your grandmother's quaint dwelling. It wasn't long before the small cottage, nestled in a clearing bathed in the late morning sun, came into view. It was a cozy, welcoming place, with a thatched roof and flower boxes blooming cheerfully by the windows, exuding an air of peace and quiet solitude. Smoke curled gently from its chimney, a comforting sign of life within. The wolf paused, hidden behind a cluster of thick pines, his breath coming in measured puffs, his sharp eyes assessing the scene. He saw no one stirring outside, no busy woodsman or passing villager. The coast was clear. A wicked, triumphant glint entered his eyes. He had outsmarted the innocent child, taken advantage of her good heart and her mother's simple instructions. Now it was time for the next part of his meticulously planned deception. He approached the cottage door with a surprisingly light step, considering his size, and raised a paw. Instead of a gentle tap, he knocked 3 distinct raps, firm enough to be heard, but not so forceful as to alarm. Inside, your grandmother, frail and feeling a little poorly, was resting in her bed, perhaps drifting in and out of a light doze. The knock, though not overly loud, was enough to stir her. "Who is there?" she called out, her voice a little weak, a soft, reedy sound that barely carried through the thick wooden door. This was the moment the wolf had been waiting for. He took a deep breath, mentally preparing for his performance. He knew your voice, having heard you speak several times on the path. He focused, drawing upon his cunning nature and innate mimicry. When he spoke, it was not with his own deep, rumbling tones, but with a surprisingly effective imitation of your sweet, childlike voice. A little high-pitched, a little breathless, yet still distinct enough to be believable. "It is I, Little Red Riding Hood," he chirped, doing his best to sound like you. "I've brought you some lovely cake and elderberry wine from Mama to help you feel better." Your grandmother, her hearing perhaps not as sharp as it once was, and her mind a little fuzzy from her ailment, heard the familiar name, the mention of her daughter's thoughtfulness, and the promise of comforting treats. A warm smile touched her lips. "Lift the latch, my dear," she called back, her voice tinged with the affectionate weariness of old age. "I'm too weak to get out of bed myself." She imagined your bright red cloak, your sweet face, and the comforting sight of you standing at her door. Her heart, already warmed by the thought of your visit, pushed away any lingering doubts about the slightly off-key timbre of the voice. The wolf's eyes widened, a predatory gleam returning. It was even easier than he had anticipated. He didn't even have to pick the lock or force his way in. With a silent, self-satisfied grin that stretched his jowls, he reached up, his sharp claws surprisingly nimble, and pushed the latch. There was a soft, almost imperceptible click, and the heavy wooden door swung inward, revealing the cozy interior of the cottage. The scent of wood smoke and dried herbs, unique to your grandmother's home, wafted out into the cool forest air. He stepped inside, closing the door softly behind him, the sound echoing a finality that went unnoticed by the unsuspecting grandmother. His gaze swept around the small, comfortable room, taking in the familiar objects, the spinning wheel in the corner, the rocking chair by the hearth, the neatly made bed where your grandmother lay, her eyes already alight with anticipation. He could see her form beneath the patchwork quilt, her head barely visible against the pillows, her face pale but smiling. He approached the bed, his footsteps muffled by the thick rug on the floor. His disguise, however, was still necessary, at least for a moment. He kept his voice soft, an approximation of your gentle tone. "Here I am, Grandma," he said, moving closer, his shadow falling over her bed. "I've brought you all these lovely things." Your grandmother peered at the figure, her eyes dim with age. She could make out the general shape, but the light in the room, already subdued, made details hazy. "Come closer, my dear," she murmured, a gentle cough catching in her throat. "Let me see my sweet little Red Riding Hood." The wolf obliged, moving right up to the bedside. He saw the faint confusion in her eyes as she tried to make out his features through her poor eyesight and the dimness. But before she could question anything, before she could fully grasp the horrifying reality of who stood before her, the wolf shed his pretense. With a swift, brutal movement, he revealed his true, terrifying nature. There was no time for her to cry out, no moment for fear to fully register. He devoured her whole in one gulp, a swift, merciless act that left no trace of her gentle presence, save for the faint imprint on the bed where she had lain moments before. The cottage, once so full of warmth and the quiet breathing of an old woman, was now silent, save for the wolf's satisfied intake of breath. He then, with chilling premeditation, began to prepare for his next victim. He found your grandmother's nightcap on a nearby hook, a frilly, lace-trimmed cap that he pulled over his head, settling it awkwardly over his large, pointed ears. He rummaged through her wardrobe until he found a long, floral nightgown, which he struggled to pull over his massive frame, tearing it slightly in the process, but managing to cover himself. Then, with a chilling imitation of infirmity, he climbed into your grandmother's bed, pulling the covers up to his chin, completely concealing his true form. Save for the nightcap, and perhaps a glimpse of his large, hairy paws tucked beneath the sleeves, he closed his eyes for a moment, listening, waiting. He knew you would arrive soon, laden with your basket and your bouquet, completely unaware of the monstrous deception that awaited you within the seemingly peaceful cottage. With your arms full of fragrant blossoms and the wicker basket once again firmly in your grasp, you hurried back along the path, a faint sense of unease now clinging to you like the cooling evening air. The joy of gathering flowers had given way to a quiet anxiety, a feeling that time had slipped away too quickly, and that you had, indeed, strayed a little too far from your mother's sensible advice. The forest, which had been so enchanting in the sunlight, now seemed to deepen in shadow, its ancient trees casting long, foreboding figures across the ground. You clutched your bouquet tighter, the delicate petals a small comfort against your quickening heartbeat. Finally, after what felt like an unusually long walk, the trees began to thin, and you saw the familiar clearing ahead. The sight of your grandmother's cottage, nestled peacefully in the open space, should have brought a rush of relief. But as you drew closer, a subtle, unsettling feeling began to prickle at the back of your mind. There was an unusual quietness about the place, a stillness that was unlike your grandmother's bustling, cheerful home. Usually, as you approached, you might hear the gentle clatter of a pot, the quiet hum of her spinning wheel, or perhaps even the soft melody of her singing as she went about her day. Today there was nothing, only the gentle whisper of the wind through the eaves and the distant chirping of crickets, sounds that only amplified the profound silence. The most striking detail, however, was the cottage door. It stood slightly ajar, just enough to reveal a sliver of darkness within. Your grandmother, meticulous in her habits and always careful, would never leave her door open, especially when she was feeling poorly and vulnerable. A tiny shiver ran down your spine, despite the warmth of your red cloak. It wasn't a cold shiver, but one born of growing apprehension. You paused for a moment at the threshold of the clearing, your hand tightening on the basket handle, your small bundle of flowers feeling suddenly heavy. The smoke from the chimney, which earlier might have been a comforting sight, now seemed to drift lazily upwards, almost listlessly, adding to the pervasive sense of quiet. Taking a deep breath, you pushed aside your misgivings, reminding yourself that perhaps Grandma had simply forgotten, or perhaps she was expecting you and had left it open to welcome you. You stepped forward, your footsteps crunching softly on the gravel path leading to the front door. "Grandma," you called out tentatively, your voice a soft, slightly trembling whisper. There was no immediate answer, only the echoing silence of the cottage. This was truly odd. Usually, your grandmother would be at the window, waving or calling out a warm greeting as soon as she heard your approach. You reached the door and pushed it open gently, allowing it to swing wider on its hinges. With a soft creak, the interior of the cottage, usually so bright and welcoming, was surprisingly dim. The curtains, which your grandmother always kept open to let in the cheerful daylight, were drawn, casting the small room in a muted, almost melancholic gloom. The familiar scent of wood smoke and dried herbs, usually so comforting, was faint, replaced by a subtle, unfamiliar odor that you couldn't quite place. A faint mustiness mixed with something else, something vaguely animalistic. It was enough to make your nose wrinkle slightly, a small, unconscious reaction to the unusual atmosphere. "Grandma?" you called again, a little louder this time, your voice still betraying a hint of trepidation. You stepped inside, letting the door fall quietly shut behind you, the faint click sounding unusually loud in the pervasive quiet. Your eyes slowly adjusted to the dimness, scanning the familiar yet strangely altered room. The spinning wheel in the corner was still, no yarn patiently waiting. The hearth was cold, no embers glowing. Everything seemed to be in its place, yet nothing felt quite right. The air was still, heavy, almost expectant. Then, from the direction of your grandmother's bedroom, a voice replied. It was muffled, a little hoarse, and strangely thick, as if speaking through a heavy blanket. "Come in, my dear," it croaked, the words drawn out, not quite the clear, gentle tones of your grandmother, but close enough to quell your rising alarm, at least for a moment. "I'm in here, in bed. I'm feeling terribly weak today." You walked hesitantly towards the bedroom door, your small basket and bouquet clutched firmly. The bed, tucked away in the cozy corner of the small room, was usually a place of warmth and comfort. Now, shrouded in a dim light, it seemed to hold a peculiar, almost eerie presence. You could just make out a figure under the patchwork quilt, its head resting on the pillow, covered by your grandmother's familiar lace nightcap. "I've brought you some cake and wine, and these beautiful flowers, Grandma," you said, trying to infuse your voice with the cheerfulness you usually brought to your visits. Despite the growing sense of unease, you approached the bedside, your eyes slowly adjusting to the gloom. You placed the basket gently on the small bedside table, its contents a small, bright spot in the dimness. Then, holding out the bouquet, you said, "And look at all these lovely blossoms I picked for you." You peered closer at the figure in the bed, expecting to see your grandmother's kind, wrinkled face, her gentle smile. But something was distinctly off. The form beneath the quilt seemed larger than usual, bulkier, and the face, partially obscured by the frilly nightcap and the shadows, looked different. The contours were not as soft, the features not as familiar as you remembered. But you attributed to her illness and the dim light, trying to reassure yourself. Perhaps being sick made her look different, made her face seem a bit swollen, her eyes a bit more sunken. You were still a child after all, and your imagination, usually a source of delight, now tried to find innocent explanations for the growing peculiarities. The air around the bed felt strangely warm, almost stagnant, and a faint, musky scent, stronger now, filled your nostrils. A scent that certainly wasn't from your grandmother's usual lavender sachets. You stood by the bedside, your small hands still clutching the vibrant bouquet, your eyes attempting to pierce through the dimness and reconcile the image before you with your beloved grandmother. The figure beneath the patchwork quilt seemed to shift slightly, a movement that was not quite like the gentle stirrings of an old woman. You placed the flowers carefully on the bedside table next to the basket, their fresh fragrance a stark contrast to the heavy, unfamiliar air in the room. You leaned in a little closer, trying to get a better look at your ailing grandmother. "Grandma," you began, your voice soft, "I hope you like the flowers. I picked them just for you." You waited for her usual warm smile, for her hand to reach out and gently cup your cheek. But instead, the face peeking out from beneath the nightcap remained oddly still, the features obscured by shadows and the frilly lace. The nightcap itself seemed to sit precariously, almost comically, on her head, framing a face that was, upon closer inspection, not quite right. "Thank you, my dear," the muffled voice croaked again, thick and raspy, barely a whisper. "They are lovely." But the words lacked the genuine warmth, the familiar lilt of your grandmother's voice. And as your eyes adjusted more fully to the gloom, you began to notice the distinct, peculiar differences. "Oh, Grandma," you said, a small frown creasing your brow as you observed her more intently. "What big ears you have. They stick out so much from under your cap." You remembered your grandmother's small, delicate ears, always adorned with tiny pearl earrings. These were large, pointed, and covered in coarse, grayish hair. A strange feeling, a tiny tendril of worry, began to coil in your stomach. The figure in the bed shifted again, and the nightcap seemed to slip a little, revealing more of those unsettling ears. The voice chuckled, a low, guttural sound that vibrated oddly through the bedclothes. "All the better to hear you with, my dear," it rasped, a touch of something sharp, almost eager, in the tone that sent another tiny shiver down your spine. You bit your lip trying to shake off the growing unease. You loved your grandmother, and you knew she was ill, but these changes were truly perplexing. You noticed her hands next, which were usually delicate and wrinkled, spotted with age, but always soft when they held yours. The hands that were now resting on top of the quilt, partially hidden by the sleeve of the nightgown, were large, bony, and covered in bristly gray fur. Instead of soft, fragile fingernails, you glimpsed something hard and pointed. And, "Grandma," you continued, your voice now a little more hesitant, "what big hands you have. And they're so hairy." The figure pulled its hands back a little further under the covers, almost defensively. "All the better to hug you with, my dear," came the reply, still thick and low, but with an undercurrent of impatience, a subtle tremor that seemed more like anticipation than affection. The air in the room felt colder, despite the perceived warmth of the bed, and a faint, musky scent of wild animal, stronger now, made you instinctively recoil a fraction. Your gaze then moved to her mouth, which was barely visible beneath the nightcap and the quilt. Usually, your grandmother's lips were thin, often smiling, revealing a gentle curve. But what you saw now was an unnaturally wide mouth, a dark cavern that seemed to stretch far too much, far too easily. "But, Grandma," you whispered, your voice barely audible now, laced with genuine fear, "what a terribly big mouth you have." This time, there was no gentle, reassuring reply. There was a pause, a chilling, drawn-out silence that seemed to suck all the air out of the room. The figure in the bed began to stir, slowly, deliberately. The patchwork quilt that had been pulled up to its chin started to slide downwards, inch by agonizing inch, revealing more and more of the monstrous form hidden beneath. The nightcap, so incongruous and comical, slid off completely, tumbling to the pillow and exposing a head that was undeniably not your grandmother's. The face was long and gray, with a powerful snout and piercing yellow eyes that now burned with a terrifying, predatory hunger. The mouth you had just questioned widened further, stretching open into a truly horrifying grin, revealing rows upon rows of long, sharp, glistening teeth, each one like a tiny dagger. The hands emerged fully from beneath the covers, no longer hidden, revealing massive clawed paws that twitched with menace. The floral nightgown, ripped and strained, barely contained the immense, muscular body beneath. The voice that emerged from that terrifying mouth was no longer an imitation of your grandmother's, or even your own. It was deep, guttural, and undeniably the chilling growl of a true wolf, raw and powerful, reverberating through the small cottage with horrifying finality. "All the better to eat you with, my dear," he roared, lunging forward with shocking speed from beneath the covers. Fear, cold and sharp, seized you, paralyzing you for a split second. The realization, brutal and absolute, slammed into you. This was not your grandmother. This was the wolf, the cunning, charming friend from the path, the deceptive monster who had lured you away with flowers, now fully revealed in all his horrifying glory. The sweet scent of your bouquet seemed to vanish, replaced by the overwhelming, terrifying odor of the predator. Your heart pounded against your ribs like a trapped bird, and a scream caught in your throat, a silent, desperate cry. In that moment of absolute terror, as the wolf lunged with jaws agape, the world seemed to slow down. Every detail vivid and horrifying. The gleam in his eyes, the flash of his teeth, the sheer, overwhelming size of him. You knew, with a certainty that chilled you to your very bones, that you were in terrible, unimaginable danger. Completely alone and utterly helpless against the monstrous deception that had consumed your beloved grandmother and now sought to consume you too. The cozy cottage had transformed into a trap, and you were caught within its terrifying embrace. The wolf's roar, "All the better to eat you with, my dear," ripped through the small cottage, a sound that would forever echo in the deepest corners of your memory. His massive body, no longer confined by the flimsy nightgown, lunged towards you, a terrifying blur of gray fur and snapping jaws. You felt the rush of air, the sickeningly close proximity of his hot, fetid breath, and the cold, unyielding grip of pure, unadulterated terror. Your small mind, overwhelmed by the sudden, brutal reality, couldn't process anything but the immediate, crushing threat. A scream finally tore from your throat, a high-pitched, desperate sound that mingled with the wolf's triumphant snarl. Your world tilted, a dizzying swirl of terror and impending doom, as you instinctively recoiled, stumbling backwards, your hands flying up in a futile attempt to defend yourself. But fate, in its unpredictable way, sometimes intervenes at the very last moment, guided by the most ordinary of circumstances. At that precise instant, a woodsman, a kind and strong man who often helped your grandmother with odd jobs around the cottage, happened to be passing by. He was on his way home after a long morning of felling timber in a distant part of the forest, his axe resting heavily on his shoulder. He had been planning to stop by your grandmother's cottage anyway, just to drop off a small bundle of kindling he had promised her. As he approached, he too had noticed the unusual quietness, the subtly open door, and then, piercing through the stillness, he heard your scream. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated terror, a child's cry for help that no sensible person could ever ignore. His heart gave a lurch. He knew your grandmother was ailing, and to hear such a sound emanating from her peaceful home was deeply unsettling. Without a moment's hesitation, dropping his axe with a dull thud onto the soft earth outside, he rushed forward, his sturdy boots thudding against the ground. He burst through the cottage door, his eyes immediately sweeping the dim room, and what he saw made his blood run cold. The monstrous wolf, its jaws agape, was lunging at a terrified little girl in a bright red cloak. There was no time for thought, only instinct. The woodsman, strong and courageous, roared in fury, a sound that momentarily startled the wolf, making it pause its attack for a critical second. With a swiftness born of desperation and protective instinct, the woodsman grabbed his axe, which lay just outside the door, and charged into the room. He swung his heavy axe with all his might, bringing it down with a powerful blow, aimed not to kill outright, but to stun and incapacitate. The wolf, caught off guard, cried out in pain and surprise. Its predatory lunge interrupted, its focus momentarily broken. The woodsman, a seasoned protector of the forest, knew the dangers that lurked within. He quickly saw the wolf's bloated belly, the suspicious nightcap and nightgown, and a terrible realization dawned on him. He remembered hearing tales, old whispered stories, of wolves who swallowed people whole. With a grim determination and ensuring you were safely out of the immediate danger zone, he continued to fight the wolf until the beast was finally subdued, lying motionless on the floor. He then, with great care and precision, used his axe to open the wolf's belly. And there, miraculously, he found them. First, your dear grandmother, looking pale and disoriented, but alive. And then, to his utter astonishment and your boundless relief, he carefully helped you step out too, as if from a dark, cramped cave. The joy and relief that washed over you, seeing your grandmother emerge, blinking in the dim light, was immense. A powerful wave that washed away the lingering tendrils of fear. You rushed into her arms, holding her tightly, the sudden embrace a testament to the horror you had both just endured and the miraculous escape. The woodsman, a true hero, then filled the wolf's belly with heavy stones before throwing the carcass into the nearby well, ensuring that the cunning, deceptive beast would never trouble anyone again. The silence that followed was no longer eerie or frightening, but a deep, comforting peace, the calm after the storm. With the immediate danger gone, a wave of profound relief washed over the small cottage. Your grandmother, though shaken, quickly began to recover, warmed by the fire the woodsman soon built in the hearth and the comforting presence of her brave granddaughter. You, still trembling slightly, clung to her, the events of the day slowly sinking in. The cake and wine so carefully carried were finally shared, their simple goodness now imbued with the taste of gratitude and renewed life. Later, as the woodsman gathered his tools and prepared to leave, a quiet conversation took place. Your grandmother, her voice still a little weak but clear, looked at you with eyes full of love and a gentle understanding. "My dear little Red Riding Hood," she said softly, "you have learned a very hard lesson today. You must always listen to your mother's warnings. Never stray from the path, and never ever speak to strangers, no matter how charming or friendly they may seem. Appearances can be deceiving, and the woods, while beautiful, hold dangers that only caution can protect you from." You nodded, tears welling in your eyes, not of fear, but of remorse and a deep, heartfelt understanding. The words of your mother, which had seemed so strict earlier, now rang with absolute truth and wisdom. The beautiful flowers, which had so easily tempted you away, now served as a powerful reminder of how easily one could be led astray. You promised, not just to your grandmother, but to yourself, that you would always, always remember this day, and the precious lesson it had taught you. You would always follow the path, always be wary, and always cherish the safety of caution. The cottage, now cleansed of its dark presence, slowly returned to its former warmth and tranquility. The woodsman left, a quiet hero, and the sun began its gentle descent, casting long, peaceful shadows through the clearing. The air was cool and crisp, carrying the sweet scent of pine and freshly tilled earth. You sat with your grandmother by the crackling fire, the basket empty, the flowers still on the table, their bright colors now a gentle reminder of both temptation and eventual safety. The experience, though terrifying, had forged a new understanding within you, a deeper appreciation for rules and wisdom, and the enduring strength of love that had brought you safely through the darkest of moments. As the night deepens and the fire softly crackles, letting out its last sparks into the quiet room, you can feel the warmth settling in your own heart, just as it settles in the story. The tale of Little Red Riding Hood, with its whispers of both peril and rescue, slowly drifts into the calm of the evening. Remember how the forest, so full of both beauty and hidden dangers, eventually led our little heroine back to safety, thanks to courage and a helping hand. Let the images of the whispering trees and the cozy cottage fade into the soft shadows of your mind, leaving behind only the gentle comfort of a story well told. Feel the gentle weight of sleep beginning to tug at your eyelids, a soft blanket wrapping around you. The journey through the woods is over, and all is quiet, all is peaceful. Allow your breathing to slow, your thoughts to quiet down, and let the gentle rhythm of the night carry you into a peaceful slumber, safe and sound. All's well that ends well, and now it's time for quiet dreams.